Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started with recognizing our sponsors for the morning. Our Education Session 2 sponsors are Bay Baby Produce, Borders Melons East, Driscoll's, Fresh Taste Produce USA, Frida's Branded Produce, Frutura, Kings River Packing, Moxie Marketing, Red Sun Farms. And our refreshment area sponsors, ACO Farms, F&S Fresh Foods, Fowler Farms, Goodness Gardens, National Mango Board, New York Apple Association, Super Fresh Growers, Washington Fruit Growers, WP Produce, and Zespri Kiwi Fruit. Let's give them a round of applause. Just a reminder today as we go into our session of our antitrust policy, no discussion of pricing, territories, bid rigging, anything of that sort. Let's keep all these conversations safe. And looking forward to our much anticipated release of FMI's Power of Produce here at Southern Exposure. I'm going to introduce our moderator, Rick Stein of FMI, and the president of 210 Analytics, Anne-Marie Roerink, our data guru. And then our all-star panelists will give their brief introduction here in a minute. So let's go ahead and get started.
All right, good morning, everybody. It's awesome to see so many of you here. Rick, I remember about 8-9 years ago, we were in a tiny little education room. So this family here is growing every year, which is just an awesome thing to see. So as always, for the newbies in the room, what is the power of produce? Well, every single year we ask about 1,500 consumers everything and anything about fresh produce, about their perceptions, the realities, the consumption patterns, etc. Now, of course, we also know, especially in an area like produce, where everybody wants to be very aspirational about their consumption, that there is reality and there is the aspiration of how you want to consume fresh produce. So we overlay a lot of those perceptions that come out of the survey with the data from Circana to keep everything honest. So it's really a wonderful 360 look at our world. Now, the full report includes a lot of information. You see the different chapters here on your screen. Today, we want to make sure we give a lot of time to our wonderful panel that we're going to introduce here in a second. But we definitely encourage you to download the report. You see fmi.org/store, and there's a 40% discount for the next couple of weeks. So we're going to pick out 5 different areas that we're going to talk about today. But more than anything, Rick, I'm going to kick it over to you and give intros to the panel.
All right, thanks, Anne-Marie, and welcome everybody. Glad to be back here again. When I chatted with our panelists earlier, I said this is going to be great because you're amongst family. So it's going to feel very conversational. I think what I'd like to do is maybe have you guys introduce yourselves. So John, why don't you start?
John Greco. I've been in produce since 1990. Have served in quite a few different roles. Started as a very, very small iceberg broker. Went to work for Cisco in 95. Went to work for Taylor Farms for a couple years in 2000. Came back to Cisco. Left to go run part of one of our distribution centers, and then came back home, fortunately, out of LA to Salinas and run corporate produce sourcing, which to me is the absolute best part of the business because it's still personal. Everybody has to sign a contract, but we do those more so with handshakes and conversations, and I love the people part of the business. You said it perfectly when you said family. I've spent more of my life in produce, or more than half of my life rather in produce, and it is a wonderful, awesome thing. I tell my kids every time that we sell true health. More than anything else in the world, we sell real health, and that's something I'm very, very proud of.
So let's move to Melissa as our only woman panelist, and today is International Women's Day, right? Let's hear it. Melissa, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I joined produce in 2011. I started at FreshPoint as a sales rep and then eventually moved over into purchasing. I joined Whole Foods back in 2016 as a produce buyer, and then in 2020 I moved into my current role as procurement team leader, and I'm in charge of all perishables, produce, meat, seafood, floral, and some dry goods as well. But produce is my true love, so.
That's great, great. And John, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a senior director with the A&M Consumer and Retail Group, which is a broad stroke strategy consulting group, but I have spent my entire career in produce. So I started with a company called Lidl, which is a discount retailer out of Germany, primarily on the East Coast in the US. I spent 10 years there, with my most recent role being the senior director of buying for fresh and then a number of private label categories. So I spent a lot of time in produce and floral, which I think I'd agree with everybody here is the kind of most exciting, dynamic part of the retail business. You get to really interact with customers a lot, understand what customer trends are. And then since I've been with A&M, CRG, I've done a lot of work across the board in grocery retail, but specializing in merchandising and sourcing.
And where'd you pick up that Bronx accent?
Yeah. So I came out of Europe, so similar to Anne-Marie. So I came out and I've been, I'm from Ireland, so I started with Lidl in Ireland, and then I've lived in the US for like 7 years.
Fantastic.
Yeah, Rick,
All
you
right.
got 2 Europeans here on the bookend, so
I
you
know.
better keep us under control.
We're gonna have to separate you guys.
Yeah, we're gonna have to. All right, so before we go into a lot of the consumer survey data, I think it's really important to level set what is happening here over the last couple of years, because I imagine for some of you, 2023 was not the most amazing year on record. As we look throughout everything that is happening in the world, we have less control over our own destiny than we've had in many, many years. That roller coaster ride that we got on in March of 2020 just continues to go. While COVID is a little bit more on the back burner, we continue to see massive impacts from inflation. And while inflation is slowing down, as we'll look at here in a minute, that cumulative effect is really causing people to take a double take regardless of the category that they are shopping in the store. Now add to inflation the fact that those SNAP dollars came out of the market, the emergency allotments in March, and then we saw student loans having to be repaid. That took billions and billions out of the marketplace. More than anything, I would describe this world as the world of and. It is not just about cost. It is never always about price, but it is always about price and. Sometimes that's price and nutrition, price and something convenient, price and something that is a wonderful experience. So that is something that we need to keep in mind throughout everything that we are doing. Here you have those inflation numbers. This is total food and beverages, and as you can see, at the very least, we are moving in the right direction, and that is something that is really, really important. Because if you combine the direction of inflation with consumer confidence, you see that people are starting to feel a little bit better about where inflation is headed and where their own personal financial situation is headed. I just did a whole lot of consumer surveys, and my simple question was, talk to me a little bit about prices. Everybody immediately had this smirk on their face, and 3 out of 10 people said they are stupid expensive. And I think that is such an important thing to keep in mind, because there are high-income people, affluent households that don't have an issue affording things from a money perspective, but certain categories have moved past the stupid line. And that is something to keep in mind and makes it hard in every department across the store. But the good news is that we are moving in the right direction. The even better news is, if you look at inflation that we see in fresh produce, we are actually far, far below average in terms of the price increases that we have seen year over year or compared to 3-4 years ago. If you compare fresh produce to especially frozen and canned fruit, you see that compared to 3 years ago, people are paying 30 to 35% more for what we could consider our competition around the store. If you take that inflation and you translate it in performance, you see that the fresh produce department has actually done a tremendous job compared to a lot of other departments around the store. The dollar line is looking wonderful for most departments because of inflation, but if you look at the units versus year ago in 2023, there is a lot of negative numbers on the board. look at frozen, look at dry groceries, so the entire center of the store, look at meat, look at bakery, look at seafood. A lot of pressure as people are taking measures to simply buy less. Now look at our performance there, right in the middle, highlighted in green. We are keeping units steady, and while steady is perhaps not the outcome we are always looking for in the current environment, that is quite the accomplishment for fresh produce. If we split that into fruit and veg the way we typically do, you see actually in 23 that fruit is up slightly in pounds, 0.4%. So again, think about the accomplishment of that relative to all the other departments. And then vegetables, very, very, very close to that year ago number as well. If we take that timeline a little bit further, you see that in terms of dollars, produce has added $16 billion since 2017, which is astounding. But at the same time, when you look at the gray bars down below in billion, you see that in terms of pounds, we have not by far grown as much. So that is really the impact of inflation as we are, of course, stacking up several years of price increases now. But still, very important to keep in mind that we are holding on to some of those increases that we occurred in 2020. If you look at the 41.1 billion pounds that we are selling in produce today, that is still higher than in 2019, and there is very few departments that can say that they are holding on to those gains. So let's go back to the root cause. What is behind our strength? At the end of the day, whether it's a brand, a product, an aisle, whatever it is, you can drive sales 3 different ways. You can have more people buying it, you can have it sold more often, or you can have people spend a little bit more. Let's just say go from an 8-ounce to a 16-ounce size of mushrooms or something like that. What's very unique about produce is look at the household penetration. Everybody buys produce at least once, but now look at trips. That's where we are gaining really, really big. People are coming to our stores more often to buy fresh produce, and that is a really, really important thing to think about. Let's continue to impress them. Let's continue to drive them to our stores because we all know the impulse power of fresh produce. So the trip is a really, really important part of why produce did better than all those other departments. Dollars per trip, that's inflation. Now the area where we really, really need to focus, and hopefully you guys will have some great insights there, is those units per trip. That's really where we continue to see consumers wanting to save a little bit, buy a little bit less, stretch whatever they're buying, not having any waste. We'll see a lot of those numbers later on. Now we are at the Southeast Produce Council, and that means when I saw these numbers, of course I had to talk about that a little bit, because what we are seeing is that the overall migration patterns that are happening in the United States are having a big impact on the overall numbers. California has lost several million people over the last couple of years, and look at the volume pressure in California, down 3.3% versus a 2% increase in the Southeast. So depending on how you're distributed, you're going to see different numbers than that overall average as well. And then of course, not everything grew the way we just looked at. There's a big difference by commodity as well. Berries have just had an astounding few years and continue to astound. The ones that are highlighted in green very lightly are the ones that actually grew in pounds. So now we're not just adding the effect of inflation, but also pounds. And you just see many on the list, whether that's berries, melons, tomatoes, cucumbers, pineapples, onions. So you really see a lot of the basics, but also some of those entertaining items coming back. What I thought was interesting is also look at the top 10 that added new dollars in 2020. Where have salad kits, peppers, oranges, cherries? Think about some of those items. Can we bring those back into the fold? Because that might be an interesting pocket of growth. So Rick, over to you to see what the panel has to add.
Great. So thank you, Anne-Marie. So John, I think I'll start with you. And I'm going to have to be careful with the John, so I might, John with an H and John without an H. So
I'm sure we're used to seeing a lot of Johns. Don't worry about it.
Yes. So inflation has slowed down, and prices in fresh were up, far less than in frozen and canned. This went hand in hand with fresh taking the largest share of total fruit and veg. I'm curious, how does this play out in the value chains that I think of Lidl and the 99-cent store that you've been engaged in.
Yeah, so I think I'd like to add some context there. So I'm the current interim chief merchandising officer for 99 cents only, so which is a West Coast value-based retailer. And so from that perspective, I kind of have the insight both from Lidl and then from 99. So I mean, how does it play out in the value chain? I think it just makes, like, the pricing is extremely important always, but you touched on a point earlier that it's the price, and it's not just the cost that someone is paying for something, it's also the value that they're gaining when they pay that money, right? And I think that what we found in the value chain is that people are still willing to spend money on produce, but that they're a lot more discerning in what they're getting for that product. So I think 3, 4, or 5 years ago, people would have been willing to give a pass for poor quality, for a smaller pack size, for maybe a little bit more waste. But I think that now with the increase in prices, and I think earlier we saw like inflation is leveling out, but people are still paying 30+% more than what they were paying 3 or 4 years ago. And with downward pressure on wages, that just makes the pie is a lot tighter for what people can spend their money on, which means that they need to get value for everything they pay for it. And so in a value chain, we see a lot less we don't get a lot of second chances, let's put it that way. So you get one chance to get the value for what someone wants to pay, and if you don't fulfill that value proposition for them, they're usually going to try and go somewhere else. And we've seen that pretty regularly across the board. Yeah.
Well, Melissa, I think of your organization has a very different customer profile than, say, John's customers. How did inflation impact your customer base, and what did you see happen in produce?
One of the things that we're seeing right now, kind of a result of this environment that we're in, our customers are going towards the yellow signs, they're going towards the promotions. So one of the things that we've seen is that there's been a shift in sales across categories, as a result of some of these promotions that we're doing. And one of our goals in 2024 is to increase units, and you increase units by putting, more items on sale, and then also trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work on sale. If you put celery on sale, you're not always necessarily going to sell more units, so trying to figure out what that assortment is.
Great. John, you're in a totally different segment. So I think of you doing food service, institutional food service. How did inflationary power play out in your world?
For us, it wasn't an inflationary trend in 23, it was a deflationary trend. When you go from August of 22 through January of 23 of $80 to $100 markets on Iceberg, it's tough to compete with that for a company of our size on just the numbers overall. We love the higher markets because, number one, and not trying to be an extra partner to the growers, that benefits everyone, right? Higher markets keep everybody in business. The oversupply, though, which I don't know anyone that necessarily saw that coming when we had, and obviously just speaking about the California side of things, a record flood in January, another record flood in March, exactly 60 days later almost. Everything pointed to seeing extremely high markets again. Fortunately, and I shouldn't say unfortunately, with the advancements in growing, everybody completely recovered, even the berry guys who had plants underwater for a week at a time. So the oversaturation of product and just brought the markets down. Again, we love to see the higher markets. It allows us to compete with everybody on a much more even playing field. For us, low markets are terrible, absolutely terrible. A broadline company of our size does not want to compete when it's that low. So for us, the challenge was just having an oversupply for the year, really.
Okay, interesting. Anne-Marie?
All right, well, we heard a couple of the market reactions, so let's see what consumers are doing and see if the insights that they are providing cannot help you with your 2024 goals. But yes, the reality of the marketplace is that 83% of produce consumers are making one or more changes. Now, if you look at those top money-saving measures, you see that many of them have a direct impact on the number of units and volume that we are selling. If you think about the fact that they are moving towards produce that has a little bit longer shelf life, if you think about buying less because they're trying to avoid food waste at their home, they're buying simply less altogether and stretching that produce dollar a little bit more, perhaps making meals where you need a little bit less of the product. Certainly we see maybe looking for something cheaper, different stores. John, you mentioned it. But more than anything, a massive focus on everything that is on sale. And while, of course, that might affect our margins, we do have enormous power in today's marketplace to leverage promotions, to pull people to our stores, and to perhaps entice them with an impulse purchase because of something that is on sale. 30% of people frequently or all the time. I went to the absolute highest frequency. There's a lot more sitting in that occasionally bucket. But think about the fact that a third of the shoppers that you have in the store, or a third of the shoppers that are buying your brand, are comparing prices and promotions across different stores. That number goes up by about 8% for looking at what is on sale at the store. Are you making sure that everything that you're doing is actually out there? Do people have your app? Do you still send the different flyers out there? What are you doing in terms of your social media communications that are often not focused on price and promotions, but is this the time where we should? And then, of course, once they're in the store, there's even more comparison between items. So promotions have tremendous amount of influence right now. And again, just looking at the percentage frequently, promotions are able to impact how much people buy, what brand they buy, stock up a little bit more if it's an item they can use more of, and also in the end going to a different store. So in other words, we do have a lot of power to move the purchase between different items within the store. And certainly we're seeing that in the marketplace as well. You mentioned promoting a little bit more. That's absolutely what we're seeing in the store today. We're not at all back to 2019 levels when almost 48% of fruit was sold on some kind of promotion, but at 38% in fruit and 26% in veg, we are seeing the number of promotions coming back. What do these numbers mean? It is the percentage of all dollars that were sold during some kind of promotion, be that in the ad, a display, the combination of that, a temporary markdown, any of these kinds of things. And as you can see, compared to last year, we are doing well on promotions and responding to that need in the marketplace. We're seeing a lot more creativity coming out of the retail place in terms of typically what's on sale, what was on sale last year for the entire week. We're seeing retailers playing around with maybe some completely different items based on what is available in the wholesale market. We're seeing a lot more pick however many items for however much money. And that, of course, is something that is a great answer to that unit pressure, right? How can you put a whole lot of different items in a set? Meat does that very successfully as well, and have a number of items at a set amount to really drive those units. We're seeing one-day sales promotions, happy hour promotions, 3-day promotions. So if you don't have the inventory for a full week, this is something else to look at. Certainly, I would encourage all of you, over time, we're going to no longer have that paper circular. Some of you already got rid of it, others, it is still coming. So that digital engagement piece is incredibly important, and there is no department better than produce to drive digital engagement. Why? If we look at the heat map of a grocery circular, meaning where are the eyes of consumers going, and you kind of check that out and you do all the analysis on it, produce is by far where people's eyes go in all those promotional flyers. It's a really, really important thing in produce, second in meat. So integrate those digital promotions in the set, in the store, to try and get people to download the app and start engaging with you digitally as well. We see loyalty programs starting to pop up. So a lot of creativity to really engage with people on those promotions. So where do they look for promotions? Well, it's really in-store signage still, and that's friend and foe all at the same time, as we know. The last thing we need is to undermine the visual beauty of the produce department with endless promotional signage. We can't go around looking like NASCAR, but at the same time, we know that people are looking for promotions, and they are looking for it on that in-store signage more than anything. Digital coupons, way up from what it was. Loyalty programs, way up from what it was. And then we see that paper circular just continue to decline over time. Believe it or not, that number, and now at 31, at some point was well over 80%. We're also seeing more planning in the current marketplace. Personally, I think that is a positive thing, because now we have yet another touch point where we can try to get in front of people before they even come to the store. So that is a very important message of the speech here today. But we see really people focusing on exactly planning what they're wanting to have, but also maybe just saying, I need fruit and veg, I need to stop by there and I'll decide in store. There's one big catch to that, and that is out of stock. When people specifically come to your store because they've seen something on sale or because they're planning to buy certain items and they do not find what they were looking for, there is no better way to tick off somebody and ruin their shopping experience than to have an out of stock, especially on an item that was on sale. But as you can see, it also has a big financial impact on the produce department, whereas 46% say, well, I'll just go to buy a different item. More and more we see that items end up going to a different store, forgo to purchase altogether, or I'll just buy something frozen or canned. So out of stock, as hard as it is, continues to be a big piece of the puzzle for satisfaction and for sales as well. More than anything, though, what we're seeing, people might be planning a little bit more, but the power of impulse is still ours to wield, and we see that 89% of people actually recognize this, that when they come to the produce department, yes, at times they will buy something that they did not mean to buy. We try to understand why that is, and people tell us, first of all, it's seasons and seasonality. So seasonality, as we know, when you have that amazing looking crop as you walk into the store, that's extremely powerful. But I also think we need to continue to execute against seasons themselves. Have that holiday set around Christmas with the potatoes and Brussels sprouts, green beans, mushrooms, what have you, because that is yet another way to get that extra unit into the basket for sure. Seasonal, by the way, is the #1 way in which people say, I'm willing to splurge a little bit more because this is a special occasion and I will buy a little bit more. Other reasons for impulse, we certainly see that eye-catching display, and this week's theme, of course, is all about the unseen heroes. Well, here is the reason for those unseen heroes. If you have a beautiful display, high quality, freshness, that's really what will drive that impulse purchase. Recipe ideas can do the same thing. And we continue to see a lot of power in things like locally grown sampling, secondary displays, and as we know, those are not easy to pull together amid all our labor issues, but certainly I would say we continue to see the power of cross-merchandising. Whether you come at it from the angle of produce, of meat or seafood, what have you, when you put a meal idea in people's heads, they are also more likely to take you up on all those different items. So some wonderful ideas here to really pull together and get that entire purchase and drive that one extra unit. Melissa, I put your pictures in here, so Rick, I'm going to kick it over to you for a panel discussion, and I'll leave it right here on Melissa's pictures.
Yeah. So Anne-Marie, I think when you started, you kind of showed that produce, although it was flat in units and slightly up in growth, it was still the better department versus all the other fresh departments. And that makes you feel good for about a second, right? But now we're focused on 2024 and what are we going to do to drive volume and drive sales. So Melissa, let me start with you, and I want to kind of focus maybe a little bit on cross-merchandising. We know cross-merchandising works, but being a former retailer, cross-merchandising has a lot of operational challenges. How do you utilize, what works for you in terms of cross-merchandising and what doesn't work?
So I think the biggest thing is you don't want the display to look busy, and you don't want to interfere with the customer shopping. And then also you want it to be seasonally relevant and recipe relevant, and also not merchandise with competing items. You know, as you see in the photos on the one with the asparagus, we have lemons, there's Parmesan and olive oil up there, and then in the bunker case, there's some bone-in pork chops and some stuffed potatoes. So right there, there's a whole meal, you know, for our customer right there. And then for the apples, there's also some Gouda, some wine, and some crackers. So, you know, the cool thing about cross-merchandising, it's kind of a one-stop shop for customers. I think it also drives that impulse buy too. You know, if you have protein powders with berries, you know, the customer's more than likely to, you know, grab it.
Great, great. John, I want to shift over to maybe food service and talk about seasonal. When I think of traditional food service, I think they do a marvelous job of kind of announcing seasonal, like you go to a menu and you see something's new on the menu and they really promote it. What advice would you have for retail on how to emphasize seasonal to help drive sales?
I think, first of all, retail does a phenomenal job on focusing on seasonal, but the key word would really be availability. right? One significant difference between food service and retail, that was a beautiful display, by the way. You walk into the produce and the home chef sees the entire opportunity right in front of them. Everything there, and your own inspiration begins. You decide what you're going to do with the asparagus or the lemons or anything there, and that becomes your menu that night or the next few nights to come. With food service, you're planning months out. You're hoping that the grapes are going to come off when they're supposed to come off. You're hoping the grapes are going to last all the way to December out of California, and that you don't have a freak tropical storm that comes through and ruins that. Right? The challenge for us is that our final end users, they're publishing their menus, even if it's a limited time offer, months and months in advance. They don't care about weather. The challenge is, how, as a food service distributor, do you find them all of those solutions? You know, retail has the opportunity to shrink the display. You don't have that opportunity on a menu. You can't put a sticky note over it, sorry, no asparagus available today. You hit it right on the head, Anne-Marie. Out of stock are the 3 worst words in produce, I would say, and even more so in food service. For an entire produce display in retail, you have the opportunity to hide that something's not available. You don't have that opportunity on a fixed menu by any means. So the challenge is, and one of the benefits, of course, to growing today is you don't have seasonal strawberries. You have year-round strawberries, right? Mexico does a phenomenal job on their program. It used to be you went from California to Florida and you were just out. Now everyone's used to having something every single day of the year. You talk to a consumer about talk to somebody in the Northeast in January about bad weather in California, they laugh at you, right? There's no bad weather in California. It's sunny all the time. You got to be kidding me. There should be no problem with any fruit, no problem with any veg. So more than anything, I think that if retail could learn, which we learn from them every single day, it's on the educational process, right? Education and knowledge is power. Keep your chefs posted on what's coming 3 weeks out, even if you don't completely know what the weather's going to do. You want to make sure that they know what the challenges are so they have the opportunity to plan for any substitutions on their menu.
Interesting, interesting. John, you know, we kind of discussed that consumers are looking for money-saving ways. We've seen a change in what's in the basket is a little bit less, but they're coming a little bit more frequently.
Yeah.
Writing a lot of lists. They're putting stuff on the list and trying to stick to the list. But we all know produce, and Anne-Marie showed it in the data, is an impulse type thing. How does the 99-cent try to drive this impulse sale?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is that those are all like classic, classic recessionary behaviors, right? People going to different stores to find the deal and spreading their money around to how they can stretch their dollar the most. And so that's a kind of a consistent theme that we're seeing across the board, that people are shopping more often in more stores. And so if you take 99 as an example, I think seasonality plays a huge role there in terms of how you can offer a deal. So even though people are writing more lists, I think what was very interesting is 89% of people are still making impulse or unplanned purchases when they go to stores, right? 89% is, in terms of any metric, it's a pretty high penetration, right? So there's still a huge percentage of people who want to make an impulse purchase. And the way I would take that is, when you write a list, I mean, when I write a shopping list, I normally don't write strawberries, I write berries. Because when I go to the store, it's like, what berries are going to be available? Maybe strawberries are going to be are like a great price because Mexico and California are coming on at the same time. Maybe blueberries are going to be a good price. So there's still a ton of opportunity for impulse when you look at it within each category and what's happening. And so in the value chain, what we really lean into then is partnership with growers to understand what's happening for you in the fields right now, and then how can we solve problems for you. And I think that's a really key aspect of what retailers can be stronger on, is understanding where the pain points for grower shippers are, and then leaning in to try and be a problem solver for them, because in general cases where you solve a problem for a grower shipper, you're creating an opportunity for your customer. And so I think a lot of times we can, like as merchants, you can fall into this trap of being like, we have to have every item available all the time, year round, no matter what, but you don't actually react to what's really happening on the ground and what's really coming out of the fields. And in that instance, you should be reacting to both tell the customer you shouldn't buy as much of this product because it's more expensive, and you should buy way more of this product because we have a flush and it's a great deal and you should kind of lean into it. And it's a big opportunity that we have.
You know, Anne Marie, before we go to the next section, one of the things I really wanted to emphasize in the report was this idea, we know that with inflation, this idea of value, where they're going to do it. And so, and value means a lot of things, it's not just price and item. And I thought what the report did a good job of identifying was, I may be looking at where I shop based on where I think I'm going to get that value, but once I get in the department, it's about the eyes, you know, you and I said it years ago, the eyes decide. And so I would really strongly recommend them when you're working with your store associates is to really emphasize this idea of quality, culling, straightening, and detailing the department in order to make sure it has that appearance.
Yeah, I would agree, and not just for impulse purchases, but really to secure the purchase that was on that list altogether, because if they come to the store and it doesn't look good at the end of the day, they will not purchase it. So talking about purchases, let's look at some of those numbers. Nobody will be surprised that in the current environment, and I will tell you, this is meat, this is seafood, this is candy, price is on top for everything that I look at. So what we're doing here is we have a whole list of different purchase drivers, and we ask people to rank their number 1, 2, and 3. So whether we look at the combined number 3 or just the number 1, you just see that power of price. But as we said in the very, very beginning, it is price and in many, many cases, that ripeness, the appearance, Rick, what you and I just talked about, that is exactly that matters. The price can be right, but if the item doesn't look like something that is going to taste great or going to last at home, that is, you know, still going to override a really, really good deal. You see convenience down a little bit, and that's what we again see across categories. We'll look at some of those other items here in a minute. Production claims, same thing, down a little bit compared to prior years. So let's look for a minute at convenience. You'd figure that life is hectic again. We're back to racing around to all our activities. A lot of people have to come back into the office after working from home for many years. So you would figure that time-saving measures, value-added fruit and produce, would be a big winner. Well, in reality, and again, whether we look at value-added meat, seafood, produce, we see some pressure, and that's where that price really makes a difference. During times of like holidays where people are willing to splurge a little bit more, that's when we see value added do well. In everyday settings, we see people a little bit more willing to get the knife and the cutting board back out and do some of the work themselves. Overall, on the dollar side, things are looking really good. We've gone all the way from 8.3 billion to 12, almost 11, a little bit more than 11 billion. But on the pound side, as you can see, we just aren't really able to break above that 3.5-ish billion pounds. We are back down to the levels that we saw in 2020, 2019. So we continue to see this as an opportunity to figure out where does it work, in what settings does it work, and what are times when value added is being willing to pay for a little bit more. What we are seeing, this goes back really to the power of cross-merchandising, is when you do deliver the shortcuts without the extra cost, that's what people love. So this is really the idea of value added during seasons, bringing in that potato into the meat department, bringing the stuffed mushrooms into the meat department. We see a lot of produce these days in the deli prepared section. Those are areas that are still growing and growing fairly quickly. Now we also see that that enormous pressure on price is causing people to shop in many different areas. And John, you mentioned it, we only have one chance because people are more willing to go to different channels. Look at these numbers, they're sobering in a way. While traditional supermarkets continue to be the majority seller of fresh produce in today's marketplace, they have dropped from 42.6% share down to almost 40.7, so less than 41%. The areas that are picking up parts of those dollars are mass supercenter, club, online. Now I will say over the last year, we've not seen quite as much growth in club or online. They've really plateaued, but the supercenter share continues to grow every single year. So there is a shift as people move their dollars around, just like John mentioned. And that is something else to keep in mind, especially as a brand. Where are your distribution dollars sitting? Where are you needing to look for growth? And certainly from a retail perspective, your competition might look a little bit different than it did 5 years ago. But as you also saw, only about 2.5%-ish is sold online. So that means a wow in the store is incredibly important. And again, I love this year's Unseen Heroes theme, because at the end of the day, a wow in the store is going to be a wonderful moment for our bottom line as well. So what are the traits of a great produce department? Well, as you can see, this time around, freshness and quality actually beats price, really underscoring the fact that a good-looking department can drive sale and engagement. Being well-stocked, having clearly marked prices. So it's not just about having a good price, but making sure that you don't have that unpleasant surprise as you go to checkout is very important as well. Variety, locally grown. In other words, people want a little bit of everything, and this is really the slide to share with everybody working your stores. The fact that to a large extent, we drive our own success relative to freshness and quality, speed to shelf initiatives, being in stock, everything we've talked about relative to when people engage an amazing looking department, they are more likely to pick up those impulse items. What else can we do? Well, tips on snacking is the number one there. 51% of people believe it would be good to have tips on how can I integrate more fresh and produce into my diet, and they have identified snacking as one of those ways. Interestingly, if you look at our competition, not in fresh, or not necessarily in canned and frozen, but the competition in smoothies, in bars that have a lot of fruit and veg in them, all these different things, they are very, very much sitting in that snacking occasion. So this continues to be an area where we can gain in consumption frequencies. Certainly, they're also recognizing the selling to health, as John mentioned, but learning more about that. Produce has an overall health halo, always has, always will. But we have an opportunity to actually zero in on the specific health and nutrition benefits. And I would argue we have an opportunity to not just highlight the benefits, but also, or not just the features, but also highlight the benefits. In other words, vitamin C for immunity, those types of messages, really tying back to why are you eating these items. Here are some pictures out of the field from education and tips, just having on the side of the bin, on the shelf, on the package, all these different ways in which we can educate people about ripeness, about health, about did you know what else you can do with it, because that too maybe allows people to buy a little bit more than they would have if they can use the items in a way that they have never used them before. Introducing people to different items, that's a really fun way to, in the current marketplace, people are more likely to stick with what they know, because that, at least you haven't wasted your money on something you may or may not like. But maybe given recommendations from a store associate saying, hey, this one is my favorite, or what else can you do with the different mushroom types, how do they taste, what is the texture? Or a Korean melon, just limited time offer, we happen to get a batch, and being able to play the market that way. This is again a way in which we can address the unit pressure we have seen as a department as a whole. Now, we also saw that the number one way in which people pick a produce department and really believe the best trade of a good produce department is quality and freshness. So talk about that. Talk about the number of times that you get deliveries in the store, or the fact that a lot of the vegetables are in the store within 24 hours of harvest, that they're picked at peak time to make sure that people have the best tasting experience there possibly can be. Because in terms of routine, that's really making a comeback. So for us, yet again, to focus on that unit in the basket, we really have to figure out how are people planning their meals, and how can we insert our items, our retail store, and our really role of produce in the diet. Routine meals have made a comeback for a while there. People were experimenting all over the place, friends and family, recipe websites, all these things are important. But one that I wanted to point out is ChatGPT or other AI. It's only been around for about a year, and yet 5% of Americans are using artificial intelligence like ChatGPT, just like I'm doing here on your screen, to meal plan. In this particular case, I said meal plan for my family of 4. I'm looking for something quick, healthy, not crazily expensive, and boom, it starts to spit out a menu. We have to keep in mind that AI is not in our kitchens, it's not in our stores, but it finds information online. So if we tell it that salmon is fantastically nutritious and it brings omega-3s, we see that salmon continues to pop up in just about every other meal, whereas in reality it's bought 7 times a year. So that means for all the commodities in the room, talk about the nutrition, about the recipes, about all these different things, because it finds information online, and that's a really important thing for produce because of the health halo that we have overall. Now, where people find information, massive generational gaps, and that's an opportunity and a difficulty for us, because while boomers are very set on their routine meals, friends and family, even cookbooks, you see that Gen Z is all about digital. TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. So that means we have to be everywhere, but it also means we get to have a lot of fun with these different types of items. So Rick, let's talk about this section a little bit more.
Absolutely. I want to dig in a little bit about this meal planning and the purchase, how you saw all the different things that consumers are thinking about when they go into the purchasing. So I'm going to hit a couple aspects. I'm going to start with you, John. So we know health benefits, nutrition value is at the foundation of the fresh produce purchase. And I think the more and more we educate consumers on the benefits of produce, it does help fill that plate. I'm curious at how you work with your traditional food service outlets to try and get them to meet the USDA dietary guidelines of fruits and vegetables.
So the world has changed. 20 years ago, it was finish your vegetables and you can leave the table, and that was good enough. Right? Today, they want to know everything immediately. So we have a platform for our ordering for virtually every item that's in our system that's called Shop. You go into Shop, it's an online ordering platform. You click on the item, it'll give you all of the nutritionals, it'll give you, if it's a blend of some kind, gives you the entire ingredient mix, gives you ideas on what else you can prepare with that. But again, we live in a world where everybody wants to know right now. We also live in a world where menus are changing dramatically overnight. The speaker prior, Kevin, spoke about what Aunt Bee did with regard to the menu for his son and developing foods specific to people. We have more diets now than we've ever seen in the past, and everybody wants to know exactly what's going in to their system. Not that it's broccoli, what makes up broccoli? So again, information is power. Our Shop platform provides a ton of information instantly. We also at Cisco have an entire team of registered dietitians that work with our customer base to help them in developing further specific menu opportunities that focus on the nutritionals and on specific diets for people.
Interesting. John, I want to shift over to you. So we see how social media plays, the TikTok, the YouTube, how it really resonates with this younger generation. I remember I had conversations in the last 24 hours with a couple retailers who said their anniversary in an event, and sure as they look back, it was a TikTok event that drove sales, and they're wondering why they're down, right? How does the 99 Cent use digital media and social media to help drive purchases?
Not in a very different way to a lot of other people. So we do very similar things in terms of developing a recipe from the products that are in store, posting about it on TikTok and Instagram, and then kind of building displays within the store around that. And we do see a lot of success on it, but to be honest, yes, TikTok is a driver for getting the information to people and advertising and all that kind of stuff, but it comes back to, I think, a lot of the themes that came through from when we're walking through the data, and Anne-Marie was walking through, is kind of the simplicity and convenience of having the products available for people. So a lot of what we're talking through in terms of meal planning is you have to have the right products available to support it. It needs to be good value. It needs to be nutritionally dense. And so we can package it up in different ways and advertise in different ways to customers. But really what we still have to focus on is the basic blocking and tackling of having that product available at the right price at the right time. And so TikTok is not really going to solve if you don't have the right product and the right price and it well stocked in store, but it will turbocharge you when you do all of those basics first. And so I think that's a really interesting point when we're thinking through how retail taps into technology in general. If you take AI and anything else, all of that is based on a good running system that's successful, And then those things are a cherry on top that can actually drive you to better results. So we use it that way. You got to get the basics right first, and then you use TikTok or Instagram or social media to kind of drive people to the section to make better decisions.
Melissa, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So I'm thinking of consumers are really driven towards value. And for many years, and it's still prevalent now, convenience is a big factor in value. It's not just price. The value-added produce for years was really on fire because of that convenience. But we've seen that a little bump on that. How is your organization seeing the value-added produce performing and doing?
We're still seeing a success in value added because I think, as you know, we discussed, people are busy. You know, they want something that they can, you know, butternut squash is something that I never want to chop. If I can buy it already pre-diced, you know, I'm 100% going to buy it, even if it, you know, there's a cost associated with it. But we're definitely still seeing a success in value added items. We're looking to introduce a new line later this year, and you know, there comes a different thing. Like, we want to introduce more value added, but we also don't want to have superfluous packaging as well. And then also value added works well in some stores versus it doesn't work well in others. So it's like really listening to customers and expand where it makes sense.
Very interesting. Anne-Marie?
All right, let's talk a little bit about growing practices. We, of course, talked a lot about how people purchase, what they consume, but at the end of the day, John, I think you hit the nail right on the head. People want to know more about what's in the food, where it comes from, who grew it, etc. So our Power of Produce question was a big one. You know, is it not just important, somewhat important? We really went in hard and we said, do you not consider it at all? Is it a tiebreaker, or is it a purchase priority, which in that case, a lot of times people are willing to spend a little bit more, etc. If you look at the influence, sure, at about 30 to 40%, it's not the 89%, some of those other numbers that we saw come through earlier, but to see that a third of consumers believe that this is a purchase priority, we see a lot of focus on country, how far it traveled, how it was grown, by whom it was grown. So if we have an opportunity to communicate about that, whether that's on pack or in the store, the way we see on the label here, that is really important overall. So what consumers are looking for is, while they want to know, they're not going to spend endless hours on their phone trying to figure it out. They really look to the retailer to provide that information, or in your case, maybe the menu or something that they can access fairly easily. So here you see some examples from across the pond. Doing business with farms that we trust. You see that in meat, but in produce as well. Not only a big sign as you walk into the store, but actually having on the package exactly what farm it comes from. And again, that reinforcing that message of doing business with people that we trust. The one on the right side of your screen is a picture out of Australia, which again is all about doing business with people we trust, and at the same time giving a little bit of a hint as to how do you keep things from lasting a little bit longer at the home. So we have a lot of opportunity here to bring in a lot of messages, and we see that coming into retail more and more, or maybe in-store growing displays or something that was produced locally, and really talking about the family farms, the locally grown in the USA. And all of these things are starting to matter, and that 30%, a lot of those are Gen Z and millennials. So this is something that's going to matter more moving forward. Interestingly, there's different claims that matter more to different groups of the population. If you look at local and USA, that is very, very big among boomers. But if you look at those more production claims, sustainably grown, organically grown, those are by far more important to Gen Z and millennials, which means more than likely we're going to see growth in those areas. Now, that is one of the areas, though, that we see price making a big impact. We saw earlier that maybe it's pressuring that convenience a little bit if there is time to prepare things themselves. We also see a little less engagement with all things organic fruit and veg. A lot of people still buy some, still pick the items where they want to buy organic, but as you can see, there's a little bit pressure on that fair amount and only organic. The big reason for it being 76% saying it is too expensive. So in other words, once the wage gap will start to pick up against the inflationary pressure, more than likely these people will move back into the organic category. If we look at that over our timeline from 2018 to 2023, you see the same kind of patterns that we've been seeing where the dollars are looking good. But if we look at the pounds, that's where we see really the pressure coming in, where that inflationary effect is taken out. So year over year, our pounds are down about 2%, not a ton if you think about the price differential that we typically see. And again, I do firmly believe that we're going to see continued growth in this area. And continue to push that 10% of the total category that is currently organic. What are the reasons for those who do buy organic? Well, it's interesting because a lot of people believe it's better for them, it's better for the environment, we do something good for the soil, for the farmer, etc. So there isn't one particular reason why a lot of people buy organic. It is really the combination of all the better for arguments that people bring to the table. And then of course, in the current environment, it is really that sales promotion that has a lot of power to drive a purchase. So Rick, back over to you.
Yeah, so I'm just amazed at how local has just consistently stayed, Anne-Marie, a priority for consumers. John, in the 99-cent stores, how do you play up local? How do you manage that with all the different locations and things like that?
Yeah, we don't do a great job on it, to be perfectly honest. So I think it's one of those things that retailers have battled with for a very long time, like what is the definition of local? So everybody has kind of slightly different definition of what it means to the customer. And so for 99 cents specifically, everything is kind of local for us because we're right in California, we're right in the kind of center of the growing region. I think that there has been a misconception that that is a less important topic for our customer because they're only focused on price. So in the last 6 to 12 months, we've actually really focused on doing partnerships with growers to get into their fields, take videos, share it with our customers to really try and explain where the product is coming from. So we have a new marketing campaign called Fresh Picks, which is going through the individual growing cycles with individual growers. We're sharing it on our social media channels. We're putting it into store. And I think the point on local is that sometimes people really want to tie an initiative to direct sales. Like when we promote local, what exactly does it do? But I think there's a very strong halo effect, particularly in produce, that if you can explain to your customer the provenance of the product, that what you're buying is of good quality because you know where it's coming from, that has a very strong impact on the overall department, not just on, hey, on oranges, I know it's coming from the valley, so therefore it's good. Because you know where the oranges are coming from, you also trust the strawberries, you trust the lettuce, you trust everything else. And so we, in the discount channel, I think in general, if I take some other examples like Aldi and Trader Joe's have done a pretty good job of developing that, and Aldi particularly in the last 3 to 4 years have really focused on it. And I think it's an area where customers are beginning to expect that no matter where they shop, they should know where the product comes from. It's not just the kind of purview of a Whole Foods or a Kroger or anybody else. We should all know where the product is coming from, and customers deserve that. And so in the discounts channel, that's where we need to partner better with our growers to tell that story over time.
You bring up a good point, Melissa. John's talking about how much consumers want to know where the food's coming from, the origins. And I think, particularly the product, where it's grown, and in terms of how it connects to local. How does Whole Foods play that out? And what is the message you would have for the packer shippers to help you support that?
So I think, in our own market research, we found that when customers go into the produce department, they look at the yellow signs first, promo, and then they go towards the red signs, as you can see, in the photos. They're looking for local. Local is something that I'm very passionate about, that I work with a lot of our growers because I think it's important. I think if we can, get product, particularly I'm in Florida, if we can get Florida grown product, I think that's great. It's less time on the road, it's fresher to the consumer and everything like that. And then how the shippers can play a role in this, I think just local planning, planning with the grower, okay, what kind of a season are you gonna have? What are the items that you're gonna have promotable quantities, and then we can just, go from there.
Interesting. John, I think a food service probably paved the way for local. I just remember every menu kind of had something about a local farm. It was this protein and so on. So, how do you approach that with linking the farms and to the restaurants and food service?
So although we're the largest food service distributor, there's possibly a misconception that we can't support local because of how much business we have to create supply for, which couldn't be further from the truth. We actually direct our sites to buy local when it's time. Melissa brought up the communication to suppliers. Part of our communication to our suppliers is that we may have a bell pepper supplier we're going to buy 8 or 9 months from out of the year. We let them know months in advance, or essentially a growing period in advance, we are going to shift to local. It's not just to support local to sell better on the menu, it's because it's flat out the right thing to do. Right? Supporting local shouldn't be a sales advantage, it should be a drive. Farmers, but Kevin spoke earlier about heroes. To me, farmers are heroes. People that pick strawberries and put 8 pounds into a box that nobody in this room could do the same way are heroes, right? So supporting the ones that do that locally is a huge drive of ours. We do take pride in reaching out. Honestly, my job is national sourcing. When it comes to local, we direct our sites to go out, but we almost pull away. They have those relationships. We want those sites to continue to develop those relationships, but we will put those on the menu because just like someone like me, I have huge pride in what the Salinas Valley puts out as it relates to fruits and vegetables. And those that sell or consume vegetables throughout this country should have that same pride that it's coming from their backyard. And that's something that we have and will continue to drive aggressively.
I'm curious about one more thing, and all three of you feel free to weigh in on this, but I've always thought of local really happens at the store level. But we see how the younger consumers are using digital, and that's a conundrum, because when you're on digital, it's widespread. Have any of you seen examples of local and digital?
In digital, yes and no. We'll use it on essentially point of sale, digitally in a region that focuses on this grower of this sweet potato or this grower of bush berries that only hits a customer segment in those specific parts of the country.
I think almost as a request to the packer shippers, the more they can promote themselves as the local supplier, then you can link back to that. You know, that could be one way. Emery, why don't we go on to the next section?
All right, so this is the 5th out of 5th section, and we're going to definitely have some time for questions, so start thinking about those as well. But yes, continuing on about the whole discussion we've been having about how people are changing their purchases, how they care more about the food. Well, another thing that's really coming on very, very strong, and in part it's financial, in part it's just the way the world is moving, is a focus on food waste. We see that 58% of consumers are saying, I simply cannot afford to waste food in the current environment, which is why they're moving to items that have a little bit of a longer shelf life, which is why they're buying a little bit less. So again, that speed to shelf, the great looking department, all of that ties into this specific statistic. Then we're seeing 51% saying I buy less fresh because I'm trying to avoid food waste. 41%, now the other side of the coin, are also concerned about food waste relative to that environmental impact, the social impact, and really that larger side of the conversation. So we talked earlier about the importance of freshness to make the sales, but certainly the whole focus about freshness and quality and having things shipped in to the store in 24 hours, your backdoor receiving policies, your turning inventory, all these things are important too, to give consumers the confidence that what they buy is not going to waste before they're able to eat it. Because that's what 6 in 10 consumers are telling us, that at least some of the fruits and vegetables that they purchase go bad before they're able to eat them. Not all of them, but it is a problem for 6 in 10 people, at least on occasion. So what are they interested in? Well, a wide variety of tips. We earlier saw the spinach, and it said put a little paper towel in there and it absorbs the moisture. The spinach will last longer. Those are the kinds of things that they're looking for. How to keep items fresh longer. Where to store it. Do I put it in the fridge? Do I not put it in the fridge? Am I able to freeze berries that I bought in the store? How to properly ripen things at home so I don't buy items that just stay rock hard for 2 weeks, after which they suddenly go bad. Those are the kinds of things that the knowledge that I know all of you guys have that we need to communicate to the consumer. Here you see a couple of tips coming out of the marketplace to simply talk about, hey, even if those items are starting to go bad before you're able to eat them, they still taste amazing in a smoothie. Or maybe cut off the bottom of the stems and put it in about a 1/4 inch of water and the herbs will stay fresh longer. Look at that banana pack out of Korea that has a banana for every day of the week with different ripenesses. These kinds of things are very relatable tips that we can provide the consumer to really address that conundrum of food waste versus buying fresh produce. The other conundrum that we have, of course, relative to package waste is the fact that we look at a lot of packaging that people are trying to avoid, but at the same time in produce, they do recognize that there is a functional reason why a lot of things are packaged. And that is important in 2024, recognizing that keeping it fresh, keeping it safe. We saw that importance really become elevated during COVID, and it has never gone back down. So what we're seeing is really the addressing of the idea of, well, can it be sustainable packaging? Also relative to portion sizes, right? Keeping in mind that food waste. So the whole package waste and food waste very closely works together in the current marketplace, certainly addressing convenience, having the right number of items in a package, all these different things. Because here is the biggest conundrum in the produce department today. While people are pushing back on package waste and are certainly wanting to avoid food waste, what we're seeing is year after year, we are selling a larger share of total dollars in what we call fixed weight, meaning it was packaged in some kind of way. Year after year, you see that the increase in dollars is really sitting in that fixed weight. And if you look at the share of total produce dollars in fixed weight, it has gone up from 53% in 2018 to 62% in the past year. So a big thing there. So thinking through what are the packaging options is a big one going forward. Packet size variety. This is a picture out of my Netherlands where we really see the idea of, you know what, not everybody is the 4-people household that we like to cater to. So maybe we have bags of green beans, Brussels sprouts, any of these things that are 150 grams, which is about a cup. Or we, right below it, have the larger pack sizes as well, about 400 grams for a family. Think about that kind of thing too as people are focused on food waste and giving portion size variety, maybe even in packaged lettuce, those kinds of things for the lunch occasion. There's many reasons to think about some of the variety that we're seeing in packaged. Certainly information, we've heard it from the panel, we see it in the survey in just about every single question. Information about nutrition, about food waste, certainly about the production. What did you do in terms of conserving water or maybe addressing fair trade, those kinds of things? What did you do to protect the soil if you're a producer here? All these different things matter a lot to the younger generations, which means as the dollar is moving over from the boomer generation to these younger guys, it is going to matter a whole lot more. So Rick, before you take it away from the panel, I'm going to throw this slide on there so that all of you guys, again, have where you're going to download the report, have that discount on there as well, and get your questions ready. Rick, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Anne-Marie. So we're about to finish, and then we'll open up for some questions. But I want to start with you, Melissa. We know that shoppers see the value in packaging's contribution to reducing waste, but they also are concerned about packaging in terms of its impact on the environment. Do you have specific ESG goals related to packaging to achieve, and when do they need to be achieved?
So this topic is a priority for Whole Foods, and we're working with our suppliers, to find ways to reduce the impact and to be thoughtful about packaging. One of the things that we introduced was a new peel and seal on our salads, on our exclusive brand salads, and then we're also exploring, other options for sustainability as well.
Great, great. I think in terms of goals for packaging, I'm assuming you think of it as a continuum, like moving in the right direction as opposed to a destination, right?
Right.
John, how about you? You know, consumers are tired of seeing themselves throw stuff away. How does Cisco's ESG goals help consumers hit their ESG objectives related to food waste? And how do they do that through the food service?
So we have a couple different avenues on that. Being as large as we are, we get approached constantly by people who want us to run tests on food extenders, if you will. We have within our network our own repacking companies where we do our own tomato repacking and our own banana and avocado ripening. So we've been able to do in-house testing on some of those opportunities and see the results live as opposed to a test environment outside of the real world. We also, through COVID, saw, obviously, for food service, demand fell off the cliff overnight, and uncertainty was everywhere. Restaurants did not know if they were going to use an entire case of oranges. We have always had essentially our own split program or a smaller pack program. What we have developed as of late is the same type of packs, but with considerably fewer touches, with considerably less corrugate involved, so removing a lot of land waste. Even if it's not product, you're still taking more out of land waste itself. And with fewer touches, you have product that is flat out lasting longer. We've already seen tremendous results from this, and we look forward to even better results in the future from it.
John, sustainability comes with a price tag, right? Do you think sustainability is still important to that value-driven shopper?
Yeah, so this is kind of a question I was looking forward to because Melissa mentioned earlier about her her focus on local and kind of passion for local, and for me ESG is one of those things that I think coming from Europe is there's a little bit of a different perspective in Europe on ESG than there is right now in the US market, and it's building. And I think my overall feeling here in ESG is that I think we have a tendency to try and overcomplicate it. And so what we have a tendency to say is it's expensive to be sustainable. And I would actually have the exact opposite view on sustainability. And what I mean by that is the most expensive parts of your chain are also some of the most unsustainable parts of your business, right? So packaging costs money. I would rather have less packaging so that I can pay less for the product, and then I'm also more sustainable. The most thing that you could kind of align with any retailer on that something they think is bad is shrink. If you want to sit with anybody and talk about something and align on something, everybody can talk, we hate shrink, so let's talk about it. It's also unsustainable as a practice to have so much shrink in your system. And so for me, if you're better at forecasting, you're better at planning, you're better at getting the right product, the right place at the right time, you have less shrink, which is better for your bottom line. Hey, it's also more sustainable for your business because you're throwing less product away, you're working with your growers, they're growing what you need. And so that's a little bit of where I would say from an overall view for me on sustainability is we should kind of be thinking as an industry of what is the shortest route to be more sustainable, and that's actually also benefiting our bottom line. And that's across all channels. That's not just discount, it's also full service club, it's everywhere. Then when you think about the value channel, of course it's important to the customer because if I shrink less, I can charge them less money. If I have less packaging, I can charge them less money. So the whole thing here is there's a bit of a cycle. If you are a more sustainable retailer, you also can be a more profitable retailer. There's also a lot of other things that need to come to it, right? You want to buy more organic produce, that's more expensive. You want to use less pesticides, okay, that's more expensive. But you can offset those costs by operating as a better retailer and providing a better experience for your customer. And I think that's my big takeaway overall that I've had is that when a team in retail sit down and say, how do we get more sustainable? They come up with a lot of whiteboard solutions of big ticket things that they can do. Just forecast better and negotiate better, and you can actually be more sustainable pretty quickly.
One of the aspects of the report that I thought was really interesting was, we had a chief economist speaking at FMI, and I asked him, if you were to open up a grocery store, what would be your target audience? And he showed just general population, and what he showed was this growth of the Gen Z and the millennial, and what a big bubble that is. And he goes, I'd really be geared towards that segment. And it was interesting, Anne-Marie, when you showed the data, how important packaging and sustainability issues are for that shopper. So you do have to think about that and address it.
Yeah, I think just to kind of touch on that point as well, I mean, they're going to be the largest purchase segment of the economy pretty quickly, Gen Z and millennials, and this sustainability topic is one of the most important pieces for them. Yeah. And I think that's why we need to think through very quickly as an industry how we can get on board quicker, because the people who are going to be spending the most money in the next 5 to 10 years have that as a key priority. So we need to match that before they come to us in 5 years and say, hey, it's a priority and we got to figure it out.
Yeah.
You got to get ahead of it.
And FMI has basically tried to emphasize that don't ever sacrifice product quality and food safety. And at the same time, understand, as I mentioned earlier, sustainability is a continuum, you know? And so it's not just on the individual items, but probably for the whole organization. What is your commitment to sustainability and being able to show the customer that? Been fun dialogue. I want to do a quick speed round before we open it up for questions. So try and keep your answer less than 2 or 3 seconds. So I'll start on the far end. John, how will 2024 look?
I think it's going to be focused on units, like Melissa mentioned, and lower prices.
Melissa, how do you think 2024 will look?
I think it's going to be an unprecedented year with everything that's going on with Mother Nature.
All right. And John?
I'm hoping that Mother Nature brings a whole lot of really good markets.
All right. All right. Let me start with Melissa. Biggest challenge for 2024?
I think Mother Nature again.
Mother Nature. John?
Labor, not just the cost of it, but people that are willing to get out and do it. It is exactly that. It is laborious work in ag, and we need more people to do it.
John, biggest challenge?
Convincing customers to buy more after we forced them to spend more and get less for the last 4 years.
Interesting. Okay, let's, what about the biggest opportunity? I'll start with you, John.
What I started off with regard to my kids' health, right? Focus on diet. It is one of the only food items in the world you don't have to do a single thing to have it be absolutely beneficial for you.
Great. Melissa, biggest opportunity?
I think regenerative agriculture.
Regenerative. Hearing a lot of noise on that. And John?
I think it's probably the partnership between retailers and growers, like really understanding what's happening in the fields and reacting quicker to it to kind of help them out to get things moving.
For this next one, I'll give you more than 2 or 3 seconds. The best things suppliers can do to help in 2024. Melissa?
Communication. Always communicating the good and the bad and what may or may not happen or what they think may or may not happen.
John?
Really appreciated John's comments on sustainability. I think there has to be a massive focus on sustainability. It's not for the largest companies to lead. Everybody has to be on board. Everybody wants it done. The more people that get together on it, it again should be exactly like food safety. It's not a selling advantage. It's a demand and a must. More people need to be behind it. More people need to be leading it, not behind it.
John, for you?
Yeah, I mean, this might come across a little harsh, but I always focus on like honesty, and what I mean by that is I think there's a tendency amongst the grower community to tell retailers what they want to hear. And so what we need to do as retailers is ask the direct questions and understand what's really happening, and then we need to get direct answers of where the problems are and how we can help. And if you don't have that honesty and the clear communication, you can't really solve problems together.
And I actually have an answer for the best things suppliers can do in 2024. I would challenge you to download the FMI Power of Produce report. I know that our retailers use it. They use it a lot with store meetings and to help them. But I don't know how many suppliers are actually reading that entire report and coming in with the conversation to support some of the insights. So I actually had an answer for that one. And now the last one. Ready? Your favorite, a fruit or a veg, and what is it?
It'd be vegetable and it'd be iceberg. It's very, very bland, I know. I grew up in a tiny house, literally surrounded by iceberg fields. And it gave me an opportunity to provide a much better life for my family and to grow my family.
That is the first time iceberg has come in.
You're welcome, Salinas.
How about you, Melissa?
Mine's a fruit, and it would be soursop.
Oh, very cool. And John?
I know they're one of the sponsors, but mine is snacking tomatoes, and I would call out specifically because I can see Harold right there. Sweet Pops, which are my favorite tomato. Yeah.
Emery, I'll let you answer this one too.
ever the research analyst, I always joke that anybody that I shop at can look at the data and know I am Dutch in about a week, because I think I buy about 100 times the amount of potatoes, mushrooms, and leeks. So I guess those
Dutch.
are mine. Yes.
Very good. Very good. All right, so I'd like to open it up for questions.
have Craig
we
in
have
the
a little bit
back.
of time left. We have
Yep.
about eight or 9 minutes.
We have, if you come to the middle, Craig
In the middle,
is
we have a
willing-
mic, so just feel free to come to the middle, and I see a
Or-
few folks moving towards
Yeah,
it.
or if they raise their hand, I'll try to run too. So
And
Craig
John,
behind
we
you,
would
too.
only expect you to be the first, so.
John Pandel. Last night, the grocery industry got called out in the State of the Union speech, and not in a good way. They talked about shrinkflation and how those evil grocery stores are, ripping people off. We talked about price. The difference between unit price and, say, the price per pound or the price per ounce. If you got called up to testify before that Senate committee when they discussed that, how would you explain to those fine leaders why you have smaller packages and selling them for the same money?
Is that for me? Sorry.
It's for any one of you.
Anyone?
Take that one?
That's a curveball right off the bat. I would blame CPG companies. No, I'm joking. It's a really good question, and I think that there has probably been a sustained period. The way I would kind of talk about it now is that we had 10 years of price increases in 2 years, right? So there was a sustained period of cost pressure for producers and for growers that retailers probably forced to push to the side for a very long time. And then it really came to a point in the last 2 to 3 years where that had to come to bear. And so there's a huge increase in price in the short term. I also think that across the board, growers, shippers, CPG companies, retailers, got a big like sugar hit from price increases, and really appreciated, I got all these price increases and my sales are growing, and now we're coming to the point that where every single retailer that I speak to is saying, I got to grow my units this year. I mean, the reason you got to grow your units is because the prices went up so much over the last 3 years. So I think there was a short-term benefit and a long-term loss that we all kind of lost the wood for the trees there.
Yeah, and I would add to that, because I get this question from the media like every week, and my answer to it is we've seen price increases for a reason, because there's cost in the system. So you can either keep packages the same and literally push people out of the category because they can no longer afford the price point that it will have to sit in because of the actual cost increases that are in the system. Or you make the item a little bit smaller so you can sit at a price point that allows people to partake in your item. So the way I see shrinkflation is really only giving more people the opportunity to buy your item. To me, it is no different than having an unexpected dinner guest where you take your 4 sausages and you each take a bite off and you just share it out a little bit more. So I really do not understand the negative narrative relative to shrinkflation. I think the industry has been very, very clear about the amount that is being sold, but I also believe that's where bulk can play still a very important role, allowing people exactly to buy how much they need, and certainly adjust that portion size variety that we've been talking about as well.
Craig?
Jesse Capote from JNC Tropicals. Going back to the ESG stuff, John on the right, I agree. Your point, it's very complicated. So if you could pick one thing, just one thing, there's many things that always come to the conversation, what you can be doing, what one thing would you pick to focus on?
Yeah, I think it will come back to my kind of original point, which is the better at forecasting and planning you can be, and that comes across from the communication partnership with your growers, with your shippers, and understanding what's happening, and then also getting the right communication to your customer to like keep the sales velocity high. The better you can be on forecasting, the less product you will waste, the more sustainable you'll be. Like that's the kind of easiest way, and I think the lowest hanging fruit that everyone can get on board with as well.
Rick, oh.
Hello. I had a question regarding sustainability and locally grown. I remembered that in your report you were talking about those 2 points and how ultimately that is affecting and driving consumers' purchase decisions. Have you seen specific categories, whether it's berries, avocados, that have been implementing that into their promotional programs? And if so, what categories are doing that? And is that influencing like who you decide to work with because they're hitting on those messaging? I don't know if that makes sense or if I can elaborate a little
understand it?
more. But
Didn't hear all of it. So
It
you
was
said-
hard to hear you. Maybe speak up just a little bit.
okay, no. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I saw in the report that sustainability and locally grown were key messaging points that are interesting to consumers. I'm assuming that that continues to be in promotions, like in-store promotions. And so what categories do you think have hit on those points? And what are the key takeaways we can get from that as we develop promotional programs with our clients?
Okay, so I think what she's trying to get at is sustainability resonates. So are there any specific categories where you have sustainability messaging that impacts the consumer's performance? I think I got that.
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying
Yeah.
to do.
But you also asked about local, correct?
Yes.
So it's almost a conflict of sorts in that, you know, for sustainability in the future, well now and going into the future, you have to have the financial fortitude to be able to get everything done that people are demanding. Sometimes that largest challenge is going to be with your small and local growers. You know, you need to be able to, you know, we talked about information instantly. If there's ever an issue, you need to be able to instantly know everything about that product. And so one of the things that we do is provide help and assistance for the small grower to be able to provide everything and be on board both for, let's say, traceability and the sustainability side of it, and keep up with a large national grower. It's not about the grower doing everything. You can't say we're partners and then tell the grower get it done, right? So we haven't, I only focus on produce as opposed to all the categories that we distribute, but I can tell you that our focus, whether again it's a national supplier or a 3-month small supplier, we definitely have focus to help them succeed, because even on local, they want it to be sustainable. It's not good to throw anything away, and it's not good to not be able to farm next year because you didn't take care of your land this year.
All right, thank you.
Time for one more.
No pressure to ask a good question to be the last guy here. But thank you very much, guys. This has been an outstanding presentation. It's always kind of the highlight of the show to me. I just really had a question which is related to ESG. And it's a question for everybody in this room. If I could have a show of hands, how many of us would have a job if we didn't have farm workers?
If we didn't have what?
If we did not have farm workers.
Oh, yeah.
Can I have a show of hands? How many would still have a job? Would
I would not have
a job? All right. So I guess that my question then comes to, as we look into ESG and we talk about waste, we talk about, you know, conserving the land, conserving water, shouldn't we include also conserving farm workers? Because without them, we're all out of a job.
Is that preserve farm workers?
Yeah, yes, yes.
So that,
you know, what's interesting, and I'll let you answer in a second, is when we ask consumers about supporting local, Anne-Marie, you remember this too. I think we started the report in 2015 or 16. And the first thing they said was it's fresher, they thought it was organic. Everything about local was about how fresh and tasty and everything it was. Very shortly after that, in the following years, the number one reason they wanted to support local is they wanted to support their local community and their local workforce and support the farm. So there is clearly a mindset amongst the consumers that they're thinking about the farmers and they're thinking about the workers and they want to support it. What were you going to add?
So I thought the question was about supporting or taking care of farm workers. My wife's family, that's all they did. If you want to understand hard work, listen to one of their stories. Living in fields, and this is years and years and years ago, living in fields and tents with rats running through the tents so that they can wake up before sun, harvest cucumbers until the sun goes down, and 100-degree temps. anybody can sell anything. Not anybody can harvest anything. And so again, growing up in the Salinas Valley, farm workers are everything. The average age of a laborer is 46 years old now. That workforce is going away. So it's not about supporting them, it's how do you replenish them more than anything else. As far as support goes, I do a lot of field tours. I get out in the field and I literally get emotional. Those people work for the least amount, probably anyone in this room, do the hardest work of anyone in this room, and love it every single freaking day. So as far as it comes to support, I love them.
That's a great comment to end it on. I want to thank our panelists. Didn't you think they did a great job? And I want to thank my partner in crime, Anne-Marie. You always do an outstanding job. Thank you so much. And thanks to SEPC for always partnering with FMI on this report. We look forward to having you read it, and feel free to give us some feedback. Thank you.